Hello, everyone. I wanted to talk about the final exam. And before we can talk about that, we need to talk a little bit about the vaccine mandate and how that has changed a lot about how this semester is going. Um, you can probably see the PowerPoint here I'm sharing. This is an article that was actually published the weekend prior to the vaccine mandate going in effect for students. And I'm just sharing this so that we all understand why this is important. That our hospitals are full already. They've been full since basically September. This has affected my own personal life in terms of needing access to healthcare that for my children that was not available when we needed it. I know other people who were more seriously affected by this in that they had to travel hundreds of miles to receive intensive care unit treatment. So this is why that decision was made by our board of trustees. And I know for some of you this is very inconvenient because you didn't sign up for this. You didn't when you registered, you weren't expecting this to happen, but that's kind of why they had to make that decision because of the variants that were taking over very close to the start of the semester. So we had to take a lot of precautions that we had hoped we would not need to take based on how things had been going in the summer. Part of that was that the vaccination rates did start to stagnate in July. So I think there was an expectation that everyone would make the choice to be vaccinated, and it turns out far fewer people than was necessary to stop the spread ended up making that choice. So then the mandates became necessary, and so that's kind of what's put us in the spot that we're in now. I also know that there's a lot of misinformation about the vaccine and the dangers of it and the effects of it. The reality is that because we have chosen to live in communities where we are around lots of people, so when we have more than a couple 100,000 people together, everyone is somewhat responsible for the health of other people, and that's why a lot of these things have gone into place. So even if you have not yet made the choice to be vaccinated, it's something you will probably have to do at some point in order to obtain employment down the road if that's something you would like to do. So I know this is unexpected for pretty much all of us that we would have to make this change midway through the semester. We weren't expecting that when we started, but because of that, we are also providing some accommodations for people who have not yet been able to do that. I also know that some of you have lots of responsibilities with family, school, and work, and it's hard to just set aside the time to do that. So hopefully, if you haven't done that yet, once the semester is over, you will be able to make that choice. So let's talk about the options for the final exam based on this reality. So we want to make this as fair as possible for everyone. Um, so if you are not allowed to participate in person, I don't want you to be unduly penalized for that, nor do I want you to be unduly favored over the students who do have the option to be in person. So having some time to think about this, there isn't really a good solution for the situation. Um, and what that means is that the final is probably going to be easier than I would want it to be because of this, but also more ethically challenging for everyone. So we'll walk through what that's going to look like and how we're going to try to do this as well as possible, given the situation that we'll be in. So the final exam will be available either in person or online. If you are not approved to come to campus, you may only take the online option. Um, if you are approved to come to campus, you can take either option. Um, Both of these options are only going to be available during the scheduled time for the final exam. So um, if you're approved to come to campus, you can do either. If you're not approved, you can do only the online option. And they will both occur at the regular scheduled time for the final. So part of this is that make I can't kind of force it to be all online because you didn't sign up for that, right? But at the same time, we have to make it available for people that aren't allowed to be on campus. Couple of things about this. This is an individual project. It's always an individual project for the final exam. Um, you may have open notes. So open notes means not just a note card, but any notes. It could be your textbook. It could be whatever notes you have, and open Google. So you will have access um, to the internet while you're taking the exam. And the reason for that is there's not a way to have an online final that doesn't have that. The software that allows that is not something the district is supporting anymore. So we can't say you can't use Google because you obviously can use Google. So because of this, if you are taking the exam in person, you may have a device. Um, that device could be a device you bring with you, or you could use one of the laptop computers. Having said that, I don't think it's going to be helpful to you. Google will probably not help you pass the final exam. Part of why I can say that is because all of the last academic year, all of our exams were online, so people did have access to things, and it became obvious what kinds of questions people were Googling, so it became easy to find questions that were Google proof is one way to put that, and we'll talk in a bit about what that will look like. But Google, don't I would say don't plan on Google being the thing that will bail you out on the exam. So you can have it, but it's not necessarily helpful. So part of this is that the grading will be both for correctness and for what I'm calling ethicalness here. And that's kind of a little bit of a loose term, and it's not really what this course is traditionally supposed to be about. But it seems like a better option than what other options are available. The other option available is if there's any evidence that you have been Googling or doing something else that's not allowed, that you would be reported to the dean, and then that would go on your record. And that's a really high stakes way of dealing with this kind of a problem. And I think a better way in terms of kind of putting it in the context of the exam itself is giving a negative score for anything that is unethical. And we'll talk in a minute what those things are. So if you have a 5-point question, you could, if you get it all 100% correct, you get 5 points. If you get none of it correct, you get 0 points. If you get part of it correct, you get something between 0 and 5. But if you answer it unethically, you get -5. So that's kind of how I'm going to approach that. Instead of it being something reported to the dean where it's very high stakes, it will be just within this exam, and it has a bigger impact. So that I say this is a little bit beyond the scope of this course, but in essence, it's very important in science that we are ethical. And so essentially what this is saying is it's better as a scientist to say, I don't know, than to try to make something up that you don't understand. And that's what this is doing. And so that's kind of why I came up with this as the best way forward for the imperfect situation we find ourselves in. Okay, so what is an ethical answer? I would say ethical answers are ones you get by using only your notes. That's an ethical answer. So that means no cooperation with other people, and it means no Googling. So if either of those happen, then you have an unethical answer. So what that will look like. So what I'm looking for as evidence of an unethical answer that would result in negative points is that if your answer matches that of another student. Now, of course, if you you know if both people get the answer right, they would be very similar. But this is partly related to things like handwriting, partly related to if you get wrong answers together and it's a very improbable way of getting that wrong answer and you follow the same path. Um, so you might go from a 0 to a negative score. So if your answers match other students' answers, you would get a negative score on that question. So if you don't cooperate, that shouldn't happen. And now this would be for both students, right? Or however many students. It's not. I'm not going to decide who I thought was the one giving out the answers. It's for both of you, or however many of you that do that. Um, if um, if I were to Google for that question and come up with your answer, then that is also a negative score. Again, one of the things we learned in the pandemic as chemistry teachers is what kinds of things will come up on Google. So we know that. We know how to Google as well. We know what the kind of the wrong answers from Google are. So if you try that, it's probably not going to work for you. You may or may not know, I know, that there are websites that you can pay money to get the right answers. And so we know kind of what those answers are, and we can design questions so that what they consider to be the right answer is not what we would consider that to be for our chemistry course. And part of that is this last one. So your answers are beyond the scope of this course. So this could be in a few ways. It could be, the answer is for another chemistry course that you have not taken. So maybe for an organic chemistry course or a higher level chemistry course. We talk about those things and you talk about them in your answer. Well, there's no way you would know that based on the course material, or the answer is based on another kind of course. So a physics or biology course might address a topic in a different way. So you might have different units, for example. Um, so these are the things that I would be looking for, and I say looking for. I'm not looking for them. I'm hoping to not see them, but when I do see them, and I saw a lot of these things happen last year when everything was online, so I kind of know what to look for here. Then that's when you would get a negative score. So instead of sending it to a dean, it's just going to negatively impact the grade on this exam. So if you have questions about that, please feel free to check in with me. But basically, don't work together and don't think that Google is going to give you the answer for something. On that note, I want to say a few things about the periodic table. You'll notice that there's a part of the periodic table that is outlined in yellow. The reason I've done that right now is to show you parts of the periodic table that might be more important on the final than they were earlier. And the reason is because these are the kinds of elements that don't show up a lot in questions that you can Google. That doesn't mean you have to know more about these, okay? So you don't have to know the chemistry of the rare earth elements. These would be questions about things like a molar mass or stoichiometry or potentially something else, potentially nomenclature, where you're provided enough information that you could solve it for any element, but they're elements you're not used to working with and that don't show up on Google searches. So I'm telling you that so that when you are taking the final exam and you see a symbol of an element that you have never seen before, that you know what to do with that. What you would do is you would look in this region of the periodic table. So if you see a YB, what is a YB? You've never seen YB before. Well, it's there towards the bottom, ytterbium. And you would use that information. So I'm telling you this so you don't get lost trying to find something on the periodic table. If it doesn't look familiar, this is where you want to. So just train your mind to think of that this will be an important area of the periodic table um, on the final in a way that it wasn't before. Again, to get at questions that the Google will not work for you on. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about your final exam. So your final is on December 8th at 8 a.m. And it's a 2-hour exam. So that's actually 1 hour shorter than we normally have for our lab meetings. We'll talk about the logistics and things you can do to prepare for it. So for course objectives, these will be all of the course objectives. So these are on the syllabus. And all of these will be assessed as part of the final exam. So I'm not going to list them here. You can look at the syllabus to see all of those. I'm going to break this into two options because we have an online option and we have an in-person option. So I want to talk about the things that you need to know logistically for each of these. So the exam will become available again at 8 a.m. and will be available until about 10:15. So that gives you a little bit of an extra window of time if there are any technology issues that you need to get worked out while you're getting set up. I will try to have Zoom open so that if there is anything going on that we need to talk about, you can be in touch that way. I will be checking in with you if you are taking it online to make sure that it was turned in. So it will tell me when you have accessed the exam, and if I'm not getting it and it's going to be due in a few minutes, I will probably be sending you some emails about that. And if I don't get it, we'll need to have a Zoom conversation to make sure that we get that right away. One challenge potentially here is that because of the final schedule, I might have to leave the classroom to move to another location so that the next class can come in and take their final. So there's a potential that somewhere between 9:50 and 10 o'clock, I will have the Zoom shut down for a brief period of time, but then it should reopen if you need to contact me afterwards. So please be aware that that could occur. You will have 120 minutes to complete the exam. This includes, so the 120 minutes is not the time for the exam itself. That's the time to do everything you need to do, which is you download it, you complete it, and you turn it back in. So there's a little buffer there of about 10 minutes to do those technical details. And we'll talk a bit later about making sure that you're able to do those and how to make sure you're ready for that. But that 120 minutes is not the time for the exam itself. It's the total time, including that buffer time. Make sure what you're turning in is complete and legible, and you will need to show your work for full credit. If you're not able to submit, then you'll get a 0. So just make sure you are submitting, and if there is any kind of a technical issue, that you're trying to contact me right away to make sure we can get that resolved. By right away, I mean, within the time that you're taking the exam. It doesn't mean later that afternoon or the next day. You should be uploading your exam to Canvas during this time. There's a lot of options here for how to do this. You can print it out if you have access to a printer, fill it in, scan it, or take a picture, and then upload that. You can write it on a separate page and take a picture. If you do that, you don't have to write the questions. You can write simply the question number. You don't have to write, the question says this, and then how do you respond to it? You can just write the answers. Again, you do need to show your work, of course, but you don't have to rewrite the question if you're doing that. because that will take a lot of your time. You will probably need to have multiple pages here that you're uploading, and there'll be a way you can practice that. So a practice exam that you can work on where you are uploading those multiple pages, um, and uh, and so that when it comes time for the final, that's not something that's taking you off guard. A little bit about the in-person logistics. So the exam starts at 8 a.m. and finishes at 9:50. So that is 110 minutes. Again, that little bit of extra time for online is the buffer for completing the exam and the technical aspects of uploading it, downloading and uploading, taking pictures, all of that, printing if you're printing, all of that you're getting 10 minutes for. So the in-person people aren't getting less time, you're getting the same amount of time. There's just a little bit of additional technical details that the online people will need to do as well. You can use your textbook and any notes on the exam. If you would like to borrow a laptop computer, you can do so. Maybe to access your textbook, maybe to access a calculator. Just be aware of the cautions about Googling that we had talked about previously. But this is to sort of level the playing field so that the online people are not getting a resource that the in-person people are not getting. You will be provided a periodic table and other information, but you are allowed to, the periodic table is like the one thing you're allowed to Google if that is more convenient for you. So about the information that you will be provided with. So you will be provided with a periodic table, so similar to what you see on the front cover of your textbook. You will also be provided with solubility rules. So table 7.2 of your textbook, heats of fusion and vaporization. So those are tables 12.2 and 12.3. These will be provided on both the online and the in-person exam. If you are taking it online, it might actually be easier for you to be looking these up instead of scrolling back up to that first or second page, or you can print that first or second page out to have it available. But if it is more convenient for you in your situation to be looking these up yourself in your textbook, then go ahead and feel free to do so. If it's more convenient for you to have that page to look at, then do that as well. But I will be providing this for both the in-person and online exams. You will need to have access to whatever you think is important in terms of relevant equations or constants. I'm not going to be providing those for you because I know you can look those up if you need to. You can write those in notes if you need to, and just in terms of where you would find those. So throughout the various chapters, you'll find the relevant equations, and then on the back cover of your textbook are many of the relevant constants. If you think you will be looking something up, you might want to bookmark that. So you can use your books, make sure that anything you think you need, you have it bookmarked so you can go and find that. One thing I should note here related to having access to your textbook or online resources if you choose to do so. I don't recommend that, but you'll have all of these things available to you, is that I don't think they will be as helpful as you might expect them to be. You will not have time to learn this material during the final exam. Okay, you should come in expecting to not need to look anything up. But if you do need to look something up, you can. Part of the reason I don't often have open book exams is because they end up sometimes being more challenging because people think they can come in unprepared. When you will still need to be prepared. It's just a matter of you know, you will still need to be prepared. The issue is because you have access, if there's something that you just in that moment you need to check, you can, but don't think that you can learn it on the spot. There will not be time for that. So make sure you are preparing. So let's talk about preparation. So for the material on the exam, about 10 to 15% will be material that has not been covered on an exam. So what we've covered in the class since the second exam. So that's modules 12 and 13. Anything else you see will be similar to something you have already seen. And when I say that, I mean on the first two exams. So the final will resemble the first two exams. The questions will not be identical, but will cover similar concepts. So if you have a question on stoichiometry, for example, on the first exam, you can expect a question on stoichiometry on the final exam. If there was a concept in the first 11 modules and it did not show up on the exam, it will not be on the final exam. So we talk about a lot of things in the course, and if it wasn't clear what things were important on those earlier exams, now I would say your best go-to resource is those earlier exams. And then about half of that material will be covered on the final exam. So we don't have the time to have a final that covers everything on the first two exams, so probably about half of it. And I would say if it seemed to be more highly emphasized on an earlier exam, it's more likely to be on the final. If you had, for example, one question worth 2 or 3 points, that question is less likely to be on the final. And if it is, it would, be a very marginal question. But the questions that you would expect to see on the final would be things that were somewhat highly emphasized on the first or second exam. So what I would recommend in terms of preparing for this exam, make sure you've mastered everything so far. So look at your first two exams. What did you need to do differently there? What did you miss? How would you do that question now? And then the worksheets from modules 12 and 13. Again, first two exams, I think, a bit more important in that we've seen that before, and they make up the bulk of the material for the final. So I would start with those and then move on to making sure you understand the worksheets. Whatever resources you will bring to the final, make sure they are ready to go. Make sure you have bookmarks if you need bookmarks for them, so that when it's time, you can just go to what you need to, look up what you need to, and complete the exam. And then I would set aside about 75 minutes to retake the exams. Now, when we took them in person, you had 90 minutes, so that's a little bit less time than you had before. But you've seen it before, right? So it's not necessarily new. If you end up taking a bit more time, you can. I would recommend, if you're doing this, practice uploading to Canvas. So the practice exams will be set up so that you, in the same fashion as the final exam, so that you can practice turning it in to see what you get. So because of that, they will show up as graded assignments, even though they are not actually going to have a grade. But that's the way to set them up so that you can get the practice to make sure you know how to do it. So definitely practice uploading to Canvas if you're going to be taking the final online. Please feel free to ask for help on the discussion board. Office hours, so all my office hours are virtual from now on. So anyone can still talk to me if they have questions. And then tutoring, I know there's some online tutoring options, so make sure you are checking in about those. Good luck, everyone. I hope you do well on the final exam.